I'm Hugh Hewitt. On another very sad day in America, another apparently left-wing attack on law enforcement, this time in Dallas, where a shooter murdered 2 migrants in the custody of ICE while trying to shoot ICE agents from an adjacent building, then turned his hunting rifle on himself, not an AR-15 or anything like that, and killed himself. No word on the identity of the dead migrants. Another migrant, believed to be migrants because they're in the custody of ICE, don't know for sure, their names and identities haven't been released, in critical condition. So what I presume, and I could always be wrong, but I presume, given what is on the bullets, anti-ICE messaging, another left-wing radical has killed more people in furtherance of a bizarre left-wing ideology. Now, I've posted on X a lengthy list, which I'll go through with you in a moment, of left-wing violence, and I'm aware of right-wing violence as well. But I want to begin by saying this. When everything seems to be going to hell, and it sure does seem to be a replay of the 60s. I've always told people things aren't bad in the United States because it's not the 60s, meaning the period of the Weather Underground, the bombings, the Kent State killings in the 70s, the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. That was the craziest time. I can barely remember it, but I remember it. I've always told people we're not even close to this. Well, we're back at the 60s. I expect the bombing soon. But I want to begin by saying, especially in the aftermath of Charlie's service on Sunday, that when you think everything is going to hell, that's exactly the time to go to church. And some of you have no idea how to even do that. You have no idea where to go. I'll talk to Mary Catherine Ham about this at the close of the show. I'm sure she'll say, ask your friends. Don't you know anyone who goes to any church? Ask them if you can't go with them. Even if you don't believe anything. Maybe you ought to investigate this, because there's actually great comfort in the truth of Christianity. It's also, coincidentally, our older Jewish brethren are celebrating the High Holy Days, the days of awe, as they say in Judaism, beginning with Rosh Hashanah on Monday night through Yom Kippur in a few days. These are the days when our Jewish older brothers and sisters to the Christian faith are involved in self-reflection and mourning and resolve. So it's a good time for people of no faith or any faith, or out of practice or in practice, to go and find out what all that stuff was about if they don't know. They don't know the gospel, go find out. If you're ethnically Jewish and you're more comfortable going to a synagogue, go find out during the High Holy Days. Well, I can't say that, because I know some Jews who don't go on Yom Kippur, but almost all Jews go to the synagogue on Yom Kippur. But if you're not one of those, maybe go this year, because this is crazy. We're living in crazy times. 1.5 million people dead in Ukraine. Russian planes going into NATO airspace. We have Israel fighting to get its people back. Very, very long and exhausting war in Gaza. And domestic terrorism in the United States, which has gone through the ceiling. And it's scary. It's unnerving. And your children probably don't know what's going on. By the way, they'll have babysitting at most decent-sized churches. You can take your smalls with you. Turn them over to the nursery. Usually grandma's in there. Turn them over to Sunday school. I did my years in the Sunday school pen. There are people there who will welcome you. It's not scary. I even put out a note yesterday to pastors, please don't ask for money this week or next week. A lot of people watch the Charlie service and they don't know what that's about, and they want to find out. They were inspired by Erica Kirk. They were moved by the testimonies of Vice President Vance, especially the very wonderful summary of the gospel by Secretary of State Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, many other speakers, Charlie's pastor at the beginning, altar call. They don't know what that is, but they might have felt something and they might want it explained for them. So expect people at your church, pastors, prepare for it. Don't do stewardship this week. Put that back. Don't do it next week. But a lot of people are also going to say, what is going on? People on roofs with rifles. In Butler, I'll talk with Selena Zito today. A person on a roof with a rifle, hunting rifle, killed Charlie. Guy on the roof, I think he's 29 years old. Not sure. I have his name. I won't use his name. Killed 3 migrants. They may not have deserved to be in the country, but they didn't deserve to die. And this guy was obviously shooting at an ICE facility trying to kill ICE people, and then he killed himself. So I'm putting him down in the radical left category until someone tells me that he is a schizophrenic category, such as the killer of the judge and the shooter of Gabby Giffords, someone who's got lunacy on the mind. I think we need categories, and we need to figure out what's going on the left, because this is really a left-wing problem right now. This is not a right-wing problem. It's not a conservative problem. Never been a conservative problem, actually. The conservative movement is quick to denounce, and always will, bigotry and violence and anti-abortion extremism that resulted in violence in the day. When Dylan Roof shoots up Mother Emanuel, they denounced Dylan Roof. I was on Face the Nation the next morning and said, this has got nothing to do with the Republican Party or the conservative movement. This is a stone-cold racist. And that's not us. And the left wing can't really do that, especially with attacks on ICE. And I want to explain to you why. But first, let me give you the list. After a left-wing radical assassinated Charlie 2 weeks ago, a left-winger fired shots into the ABC studio in Sacramento after Kimmel was sidelined for a few days. There was also in September an attempted bombing of a Fox News van. Then today's attack. This is the third shooting at ICE facilities this year, one in July, one in August, now one in September. Add these to the two attempts on President Trump's life, one of which killed Corey Compatore, the murder of healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in December of 2024, the attempt to kill Justice Kavanaugh in 2022, the attempted massacre of the GOP caucus while at the baseball practice in 2017, the murderous attacks on Catholic students in Minnesota this year on August 25th, the murderous attack on Christian kids at school in Nashville on March 27, 2023, and you see a pattern. Now, there's lots of other violence. There's Islamist violence. I'm putting that in its own category. 9/11, 10/7, that's radical Islam. That's not the radical left. People talk about the Green-Red Alliance. I'm not. I got different buckets. And there's bigoted white supremacist violence. That's not political violence. That's the violence of crazed Nazi ideology, and that's not part of the landscape here. But the left wing is using that language, and the left wing language is permission structure. They are creating a permission structure for their craziest people to go out and shoot people. What do I mean by that? Well, let's listen to Democratic Representative John Larson at a rally less than a month ago, cut number 9.
This is not Germany. That's the SS and the Gestapo. This is the United States of America. Unmask yourselves.
Okay, so John Larson calling ICE the Gestapo. Jasmine Crockett, MSNBC, Ali Velshi, less than a month ago, cut number 10.
But as somebody who understands history, when I see ICE, I see slave patrols. Now, I never lived through the slave patrol period, but if you know the history of policing in this country.
Enslavement. Got that? That's it. Here's a Newsbusters montage of MSNBC hosts, not yours truly, I'm gone now, referring to ICE in various ways. Cut number 11.
ICE is looking more and more like an American Gestapo.
They're huddled around the elevator banks in masks without identifying information. What a terrifying, these are Gestapo tactics.
But it has created this year, as they've seen, the kind of fascist ICE Gestapo militias go round up Latino American citizens in places like LA.
ICE agents, masked ICE Gestapo agents, getting more funding than any other law enforcement agency in the history of the United States.
ICE running Gestapo-like around our country.
The Gestapo had the same function. It was there to draw a distinction between us and them. It was not federally, it was controlled by the leader. And we're seeing disturbing similarities between this force and the Gestapo.
We've got these masked thug cowards kidnapping innocent people and sending them off to be slaves or tortured in other countries.
Dressing like thugs and acting like thugs.
People still want to come here despite the crazy. They still want to come here because they know in this land, their voice is protected. Their rights are protected. And there won't be jackbooted thugs coming in wearing masks over their face to take them off the streets. Oh, wait. I'm sorry, Simone, that's happening.
Oh, it's happening.
That's happening right now.
That is what I'm talking about. And you end up with 3 dead migrants, or 2 dead migrants and 1 seriously wounded in Dallas, and a radical left-winger dead on a roof because they've been radicalized by the web or by MSNBC or by other people. And the permission structure is the language of the left. Well, that's the permission structure they've created. Danielle Pletka is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. She's a national security expert, one of the co-hosts, along with Mark Thiessen, of the podcast, What the Hell is Going On, primarily national security focused. Danny, welcome. You're too young to remember the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy or Kent State. I can barely remember them, so I know you can't remember them. But you are familiar, at least, with the intellectual history of the radical left and revolutionary violence. We've had another murder today by what appears to be another left-wing nut with anti-ice casings on his bullets. He shot 2 migrants to death and seriously wounded a 3rd before killing himself. That follows Charlie's assassination and a long list of other things that are so disproportionately on the left. Got to ask you, are we back in the 60s from what you have read about them, because you can't remember them?
You are too gracious. I wish I didn't remember them. Look, Mark and I talked about this on the podcast about Charlie Kirk that we released this morning, actually, and you know we've all been thinking about this a great deal. I think it's important for people to understand just how this permission structure for violence has been constructed on the left. Because even though polls show that a larger percentage of people on the left believe that it's appropriate to use violence, the reality is the mainstream of the American left still does not think that violence is appropriate. So how have they made this okay? And they have. We should understand that. And Hugh, I think that the answer is that they have made it okay by constantly suggesting that our democracy is over. Our Constitution is under attack. Rights are being taken away from Americans. Donald Trump is trying to take away the election of 2028. Donald Trump is a fascist. People who support Donald Trump are fascists. Republicans are fascists. If you describe your enemy that way, how would you deal with those enemies? How would you deal with a Hitler today? How would you deal with a Mussolini, a Pol Pot, a Stalin? You would kill them. And this is what they've constructed. And this is why we are seeing violence, because it is being thought of by the far left, and it is being given a permission structure by the mainstream left.
Now, I said in the opening, Danny, permission structure is the language of the left, but in fact it's projection, and it's projection onto the right as to what we're doing. ICE is doing its job. That's all it's doing. It's doing its job. It's supposed to detain people who are in the country without permission, who have got deportation or detention orders, and get them out of the country. Charlie was on a speaking tour debating people when he was murdered in cold blood by a radical leftist. And, of course, 2 attempts on President Trump, both by left. Well, we don't know much about Thomas Crooks, but I'm assuming. Where does it go? Does the fever break?
I see no reason to believe that the fever breaks, because I don't see that those on the left who think this is wrong, those on the left who are ashamed by the Jimmy Kimmels, who are ashamed by those in their party and in their political mainstream who celebrated Charlie Kirk's death, have done anything to tone down the rhetoric. There's been no real effort on the part of intellectual leaders who dominate our airwaves, whether it is on the networks or it is on Blue Sky or on Substack, where many of our friends are also. But you see no effort to say, stop right here.
Yeah, in fact,
this has gone too
Governor
far.
Newsom on Colbert last night said the 2028 elections are going to be canceled. That's it, that he's afraid. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. I can't believe it.
It is stupid. It's least common denominator. It's gross.
All right, I have to get to this. Originally, I asked you to be on because of the comment that the president made yesterday that we should shoot down Russian planes when they enter NATO territory. You ran the only war game that I've ever participated in. Thank God I was the vice president, didn't have to do anything, make any decisions. And so I am curious, if you opened up a war game with a shoot down of a Russian plane after repeated incursions into NATO territory, what do you think the next move would be?
So I'm not the expert that my colleague Fred Kagan is on how Russia fights, but having been around long enough and being a national security expert, one thing I can say I've learned over the last few years is that people keep telling us that our enemies are stronger than they are. People keep telling us, what? Tucker Carlson told us how many Americans would be dead if Israel or the United States attacked Iran, right? How many people would be dead if the Syrians were taken on? How many people would be dead if Hezbollah was taken on? Russia is a paper tiger, as the president said yesterday on Truth Social. And if this is a country that is losing more soldiers in weeks than we lost in both Afghanistan and Iraq combined, that cannot defeat the much smaller, much weaker Ukraine, the idea that by NATO calling their bluff, we are going to precipitate World War III and that they are not going to be instantaneously crushed seems to me to be ridiculous.
Well, World War III means tactical nuclear weapons. Isn't that the ace in his back pocket? Isn't that what deters us from shooting down, ending the war in Ukraine, actually, is the threat of the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons?
Look, first of all, he has toyed with the threat of tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. But of course, let's not forget that he has troops in Ukraine, so he would be killing a lot of them. Then, of course, there is the wind that blows. Tactical nuclear weapons do not stay where tactical nuclear weapons blow up. They have implications for all of the neighbors, as we know all too well. We've modeled this. So the idea that he would use them, I think, is far from credible. In addition, the idea that he would risk his own annihilation. I mean, remember, he wants Ukraine, for sure. He'd love NATO to go away, for sure. He'd love the sanctions to go away. But job one for Xi Jinping, for Vladimir Putin, for Ayatollah Khamenei is regime security.
Right. And so that leads me to my last question. Do you think instead of passing idiot resolutions about a Palestinian state that doesn't exist, the Europeans will stop buying Russian oil now? Because this is getting to the point they actually have to help us stop Putin if they want us to stop Putin.
Look, I think they understand that. The problem is that they have put in place the kind of laws, the kind of green economy that means that they are entirely dependent upon Russian oil and gas because they cannot produce it. And the other problem is, of course, that it is two of Trump's friends, let's use that in quotation, who are big consumers of Russian oil, namely Viktor Orban in Hungary and Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. One NATO ally, one member of the EU. But I agree. I think the Europeans understand this as a priority, and I hope Donald Trump will threaten sanctions against those who are buying Russian oil in order to persuade them of the insanity of this Biden policy.
I hope you're right. I think he said that at the UN yesterday. I hope he follows up, whether it's Turkey, whether it's Hungary. No one should be buying Putin's oil. It will fall apart if he can't sell the oil to India or anybody else. Danny Pletka, thank you. Everyone ought to go out and get What the Hell is Going On podcast. I didn't know that you talked about Charlie, so I will go and listen to that one soon after this program today. Thank you, Danny. I have a new sponsor, and I've rarely been as excited about a sponsor as this one, because the American Exploration and Production Council, AXPC, does now what I did until I retired from the active practice of law in 2016, which is try and make permitting rational. Ann Bradbury is their executive director and president, CEO. Ann, welcome. You won't know this because I doubt you listened to the show all these years, but from 1989 to 2016, when I retired from the practice of law, I was a federal permitting lawyer for land use developers and oil and gas explorers on the West Coast, primarily in the western states. So I know the EPA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, state and local land use. It sent my kids to college, right, because permitting is forever and it's expensive. But if you've got a plan to make it simple, we need the energy because energy is freedom. What's the plan?
Energy is freedom. So thanks for that intro, Hugh. AXPC, first of all, represents the leading onshore producers of oil and natural gas domestically. And we care a lot about permitting reform. Demand for energy is going up. We are in an existential race to win AI with China, and we need vast amounts of energy, much more than we're using right now. And in order to make that happen, we need permitting reform, because as you well know, our permitting reform laws currently were built for a different era. And so if we want to win the AI race, and if we want to keep energy affordable and reliable here at home, we need to fix our permitting laws.
Now, and I'm going to have Lee Zeldin on tomorrow. Doug Burgum's been on a few times. I talk about permitting reform with everyone, but we really need a legislative fix for things like the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act. What is the council actually looking to do? Because permitting reform could be anything from expediting the elevations EPA engages in on a 404 permit to actually stripping out the 10A process and letting people build and pipelines that we need.
That's exactly right. So our energy systems are incredibly complex. So from upstream to midstream to generation to transmission, permitting problems are prevalent at every part of the energy system. But there's really a few key components that we need statutory, durable permitting reform around. And the first is NEPA. So we need to modernize NEPA to remove a lot of the bureaucratic hurdles and redundancies that exist. Secondly, and you're a lawyer, you'll know this, Hugh, we need to end the NEPA litigation abuse. So NEPA is the most litigated environmental statute on the books. It's been around for 5 decades, and the lawsuits are generally targeted at stopping energy development, not enabling energy development. So we need some common sense reforms around the litigation process, which makes projects more costly, more risky, and often entirely derails them. On federal lands, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, because, well, the Center for Biological Diversity is one of many with whom I have dueled, including the Natural Resources Council and everybody else. It's always a legal duel. The lawyers get rich and the projects don't move forward. Do you want preemption of state and local laws, which also end up in a tumbleweed tangle of regs on top of the federal side?
So that's certainly something we'd consider. I think some other more recent, more sort of, other options on the table include limiting the litigation to stakeholders who are directly impacted. So you can't have a party from California come into North Carolina to sue on a project that they actually aren't impacted by at all. We should establish reasonable timeframes, so you can't wait years and years until a project is often operational before suing and trying to pull back a permit for that project. So, I think there's a lot of different options on the table to be considered. Some of them are bipartisan in nature, but anything that really reduces the amount of frivolous litigation that stops and drives up costs for these essential projects.
Now, if NEPA reform were to actually move to the floor, heads would explode on the left, and you'd be painted as extremists who are going to rape, pillage, and plunder the environment. Are you shaping the statutory battlefield right now by being on like with Ruthless and Me? Is that what the plan is? Because it's going to be quite a battle, and you need the Republicans actually to be on both sides. I know you're nonpartisan, but you need the Republicans to control the Congress.
Absolutely. So permitting reform has to be a bipartisan endeavor. We need durable long-term permitting reform. And that's going to require Republicans and Democrats coming to the table. Now, I think there is a growing consensus about the need to enact comprehensive permitting reform to win the AI race. And this has been impacting all forms of energy, not just oil and gas. So yeah, it's essential that Republicans come to the table. We're also having constructive conversations with Democrats because a lot of wind and solar projects have also been held up because of NEPA problems.
Well, keep coming back. NEPA is, it was the best of intentions, signed by Richard Nixon along with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. It was best of intentions. It's out of control. And AXPC, the American Exploration and Production Council, is going to fix it. And I look forward to our next conversation. I'll talk to Lee Zeldin about this tomorrow, and I appreciate your being on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Governor Gavin Newsom went on Stephen Colbert's show last night and proceeded to go completely wildly hyperbolic. As soon as, Charlie's funeral's done Sunday, 7 p.m. East Coast time. Tuesday night, Gavin's out doing Gavin stuff. cut number 13. Okay, that's late night comedy, by the way. Gavin kept going. Again, this is before the latest left-wing radical shot 3 migrants, killing 2, wounding 1 seriously at the ICE facility, aiming at ICE agents in Dallas this morning. This was last night, cut number 14.
You raised.
So we're attacking the legitimacy of American elections, which I didn't think we were supposed to do anymore. And then cut number 15, Gavin jumps the shark.
I fear that we will not have an election in 2028. I really mean that.
Stop. I want to play it again because it's like we all know when Fonz jumped the shark. You've all seen the video. If you don't know what it is, go look up jumping the shark. It's when the show was over. Happy Days was over when Fonz jumped the shark because it was just so stupid. This is just so stupid. Cut number 15.
I fear that we will not have an election in 2028. I really mean that.
All right, now stop. I want to go then to this morning's presser. The Dallas field office director of ICE, Joshua Johnson, after his facility has been attacked. Cut number 2.
This is the second time I've had to stand in front of you and talk about a shooter at one of my facilities. And I think that the takeaway from all of this is that the rhetoric has to stop. There are people out there who are seeing what is being placed online, and they're coming and they're doing acts of violence against ICE employees. It's dangerous.
All right, cut number 5, the director of ICE, Todd Lyons on CNN. Cut number 5.
I've never seen anything like this in my law enforcement career. I've never seen threats on law enforcement, specifically ICE, increase the way it is. You know, we're up over 1,000% assaults on officers right now. And really just a lot of the talk that's out there, a lot of the rhetoric is just the violence directed towards law enforcement officers just trying to do their job. And it would just keep
FBI special agent in charge of Dallas, Joseph Rothrick, cut number 7 after the shooting this morning.
I confirm at this time that the FBI is investigating this incident as an act of targeted violence. It is unfortunately just the most recent example we've seen of targeted violence, to include here in North Texas, where back on July 4th, we saw a coordinated attack carried out against an immigration detention center in Alvarado, Texas. What I can also share with you is that early evidence that we've seen from rounds that were found near the suspected shooter contain messages that are anti-ICE in nature. Again, this is just the most recent example of this type of attack. This will be a whole
Vice President Vance had this to say this afternoon, cut number 18.
So here's my sacred obligation to you, to all the law enforcement, but every person, whether they wear a uniform or not. Over the next couple of years, the Trump administration is going to do everything that we can to dismantle the networks, to destroy the funding, and to make it harder for people to kill one another just because they disagree with what somebody says. That is what we're going to do. We're going to fight for it.
The vice president went on to tell Gavin Newsom he could go straight to you-know-where, and that Gavin has no place in the political conversation in the United States. I'll get that tape for you. Generalissimo, if you haven't found it already, I'll send you a link during the break. And Vance is going to take point here, and good, because this is crazy stuff. In fact, it's getting crazier. Christopher O'Leary was on MSNBC last night with Ana Cabrera, cut number 16.
Yes. I don't know if the rooftop trend is going to be a thing. I mean, it could just be coincidental that the best vantage point just happened to be elevated positions in this case. But, you know, people emulating this kind of attack is certainly a concern. The irony with the writing, the first time we really saw that was Brenton Tarrant in the Christchurch shooting in a mosque in New Zealand, and he was a fierce, white supremacist and neo-Nazi.
Got it. Did you get the message on MSNBC? Charlie's killer with the bullet engravings, and obviously the former agent didn't know about what would happen this morning. It's all the fault of white supremacists in New Zealand. That's MSNBC's lockdown logic. I'm going to get that clip from JD to play for you about Gavin, and we all know who we're talking about here. the Vice President and the Governor of California. Governor, I think, just threw himself out of the race last night. Vice President Vance in New Hampshire this morning, after the shooting occurred in Dallas, aware of what Gavin Newsom had said last night on the Colbert Show about there not being elections in 2028, Putin-style elections in 2026, aware of all the Gestapo rhetoric I played for you. 2 migrants are dead. 1 is seriously wounded. The killer shot himself. He's anti-ICE. Here's what the Vice President said today.
And I think that is the most disgusting thing. The very people who keep us safe ought to be honored and protected and praised by Democrats and Republicans alike. It is time to stop the rhetorical assault on law enforcement. Because here's what happens. Because here's what happens when Democrats like Gavin Newsom did say that these people are part of an authoritarian government. When the left-wing media lies about what they're doing, when they lie about who they're arresting, when they lie about the actual job of law enforcement, what they're doing is encouraging crazy people to go and commit violence. You don't have to agree with my immigration policies. You don't have to agree with Donald Trump's immigration policies. But if your political rhetoric encourages violence against our law enforcement, you can go straight to hell and you have no place in the political conversation of the United States of America.
Gavin Newsom, volley back to you. Going to come back and tell us again. Look, Gavin's been invited on this program repeatedly. He's repeatedly accepted. He never shows up. He goes on Patsy's like Colbert. He'll show up on Kimmel soon. They'll cry together on the couch. I'm very serious. He's welcome to come here. Charlie Kirk took him apart. He's not going to come here. But last night was jumping the shark for Gavin. I used to think he was going to get the nomination. Now I think maybe normal Democrats are going to ask for Andy Bashir. Got to take my Relief Factor. I'm FCC regulated, so I got to tell you, FCC Relief Factor is my sponsor, but I'm glad that they are. Did my 6.2 this morning, my 10K, and I'm feeling good. I haven't been able to do it for 2 days because I was in Connecticut doing my Connecticut thing. But I'm back, got my 6 miles in. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. I like to take it on the air so that if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, listening on the Salem Radio Network, or on one of our great affiliates, whether in Connecticut or in Florida or California or anywhere, from north to south, east to west, you hear me or see me take my Relief Factor. And the reason I do that is it works. And I get my miles in, and I'm not going to stop getting my miles in. It's become a lot easier, by the way, not just because of Relief Factor, but because of podcasting. It's just so much more fun. And the fact that the Guardians beat the Tigers 5-2. Sorry, Detroit. I'm sorry. Biggest comeback in the history of baseball since the division structure came in. The Cleveland Guardians were 15.5 games behind the Detroit Tigers, and they're tied in first place. Now, doesn't mean that they can't collapse in the next 5 days. This is Cleveland we're talking about. But I don't think so. They're playing guards ball. Last night, Schoolboy hit David Fry smack in the face with a 99-mile-per-hour. I haven't got an update on David Fry. Say a prayer for him and for Schoolboy. Tyler Schoolboy's not a bad guy. I think that's his first name. He didn't mean to do it, but it knocked him right out, and it blew him up. And the Guardians won, and they're now in first place, and they're heading the wild card. And the Tigers are back at 6:40 tonight in Cleveland. And I've got my Relief Factor. Call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, or go to relieffactor.com. Get the starter pack for $19.95, relieffactor.com.
Here's my sacred obligation to you, to all the law enforcement, but every person, whether they wear a uniform or not. Over the next couple of years, the Trump administration is going to do everything that we can to dismantle the networks, to destroy the funding, and to make it harder for people to kill one another just because they disagree with what somebody says. That is what we're going to do. We're going to fight for it.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That was Vice President Vance earlier today after yet another outburst of deadly left-wing violence in Dallas. Left 2 migrants dead and another assault on an ICE office. I'm joined by Majority Leader of the United States Senate, John Thune, Senator from South Dakota. Senator, your old colleague, Senator Vance, now Vice President Vance, laid it out. Do you have a reaction to what happened in Dallas this morning, coming so soon on the heels of the assassination of Charlie Kirk and other left-wing violence?
Well, I mean, I think that the facts and details are still coming in, Hugh, but it does appear that, again, this is sort of left-wing activists resorting to violence. And, it's hard to fathom, I guess, what the where the country's headed and where all the rhetoric that's been directed at President Trump and others obviously is radicalizing certain people, and they're resorting to political violence. It's really unfortunate. It's tragic, and I think it speaks to the need for change and reform among a lot of the political leaders and the sort of the Democrat left in this country, who seem to be generating the kind of emotion that leads to these really tragic shootings.
Leader Thune, you're like Mr. Level-headed guy and always even keel, very South Dakota. When Gavin Newsom goes on Colbert last night and says we're not going to have elections in 2028, do you just think that's a joke, or do you recoil from that? Because I don't know what my reaction should be, because it's so stupid.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like that just happens whenever he seems to open his mouth. I don't know what to make of it either. What is this the thought process that leads to these kinds of statements? And so I just
he and your opponent in the Senate, Leader Schumer of the Democrats, are in a contest for dumb things to do and say.
Yeah.
And
I know.
The dumb thing that's coming up. Well, first I want to thank you for the rules reform and holding the caucus together, and for getting Mike Waltz to the UN and 50 other people around there. Did you almost lose anyone because you kept the caucus together?
Yeah, it was fairly remarkable, Hugh. It took a lot of work. We spent a lot of time, sitting down and having conversations and making the arguments. But in the end, I think people concluded we've got to fix this. And what the Democrats have done is broken it beyond repair. So we're going to get more done. We got a whole new slate of nominees for a lot of these positions that we're going to take up next. But I'm glad we were able to get started, and grateful that we had the team all on board for doing what needed to be done.
I'm glad you had Ambassador Waltz up there for the UNGA when the president was
totally
there. Let me turn now to the Schumer shutdown. Because I can talk about Gavin all day long, but people are used to him. They don't know what Chuck Schumer's planning. I think he's going to shut down the government for a long time. Is that the signal you're getting?
Seems to be. And, trying to predict what some of these guys are going to do. But I think what's happening, and Newsom obviously is playing to this crowd, and so is Schumer in the Senate. But the radical left, Hugh, is they just want to blow anything up that has anything to do with President Trump. It is this Trump derangement syndrome, unlike anything we've ever seen before. So much so that they're taking what I think are pretty bizarre steps, and frankly steps that I think are not smart politically for them. But they can't see; they're just blinded by the hatred, and they're doing some really strange stuff. I mean, obviously Newsom's trying to run in 2028, and so he's out there every single day. Throwing crazy statements at the wall. But Schumer, some of the decisions that they're making now have real consequences. And I'm hoping that some of the Democrats over there on his side of the aisle will come to their senses and realize what a bad idea this is. But that seems to be where he's going. And maybe he feels like he doesn't have any choice. After he voted to keep the government open in April, he got blown up by the left-wing base in the country. But that's who they're answerable to these days. It is the tail wagging the dog, and Schumer doesn't seem to have any intention, at least at this point, of deviating from a strategy that would take us into a government shutdown. But I hope there are people around him on the Democrat side who see it differently.
Now, Leader Thune, I want to make sure the audience knows a couple things. One, the House has already passed a clean CR to keep the government open while appropriations regular order proceeds. So the Republicans will pass that, but they need at least 7 Democrats to do so. Have any Democrats indicated their willingness to keep the government open with the 53 Republicans?
John Fetterman, but we'll see beyond that. Right now, everybody seems to be following down the Schumer shutdown path. But I hope, what's ironic about this, because you're right, we have a bill at the desk in the Senate right now, Hugh, that would keep the government open, passed by the House, ready to be signed into law by the president. All we need is, as you said, a handful of Democrats to come across the aisle and vote to keep the government open. A short-term funding resolution, short-term, that would enable us to finish up the other appropriations process, something that we did 13 times when the Democrats had the majority and Biden was in the White House. We did 13 short-term continuing resolutions to fund the government. That's what this is. It's nonpartisan, bipartisan. It is clean. It is simply an opportunity to give us the chance to continue to complete the appropriations process. But the Democrats have decided to take it hostage. I mean, they have hijacked this in a way that they think advantages them politically. But I still think the American people are going to see it that way for the reasons that you just mentioned. We got a bill sitting at the Senate desk, passed by the House, ready to be signed into law by the president to keep the government open, and they want to hijack that to do over $1 trillion in new spending, allow free health care for illegals, completely wipe out the rural hospital fund that we passed in the One Big Beautiful bill to support our rural hospitals, and obviously, it's just the Democrat liberal wish list, and there's no way they're not serious, but that's where we are.
So how long can they? Shutdowns always end, and I want to assure the audience, if you get a Social Security check or a Medicare check or any check like that, that keeps going. The entitlements don't shut down. The government essential services don't shut down. But you can inconvenience a lot of people for a long period of time. How long do you think they're willing to keep the government shuttered, Leader?
Good question. And I've always argued that the Democrats are the government party. They are the party of government. And so it strikes me, at least, that this has some serious ramifications for them and their political constituency and their belief system, for that matter. But how long they want to, if we end up in that posture, how long they want to keep it going remains to be seen. But I don't know if you remember this. The argument they made in April, for those that voted to keep the government open, the argument they made was that you don't want to give Trump, basically, by shutting the government down, was in effect carte blanche to do whatever he wants to do with these government agencies, and to let the OMB make decisions about who's essential and who isn't, because they do fundamentally believe they are the government party, which is why I think it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard for them to sustain this over a long period of time. But we'll see. I mean, like I said, I think they think it is politically advantageous to them right now and a benefit to their their political fortunes, which are, frankly, in the tank at the moment, and they see this as an opportunity to be grabbed. But I think they're wrong, and I think people are going to disagree with that.
I think you're right. They're going to get hammered. And I also assume that they'll fold eventually. In the meantime, I assume the appropriations process will go forward in regular order. Might you start a second reconciliation with your colleagues in the Senate and their counterparts in the House as a means of overcoming this? Because you can do another reconciliation. You can fund the government forever if you want, if you pass another budget and another reconciliation.
Yeah, I mean, we were able to get some things done, frankly, because of what the Democrats had done in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, where they actually did a bunch of spending on the appropriations or on the reconciliation bill. Historically, that's kind of been ruled out of order, but we expanded on that when we did the One Big Beautiful bill and funded border security, funded national security. So, that's something I think probably my assumption is that we'll explore all the options if we get to a point where the government is shut down and, it starts having the effect that it will over a period of time. But I still think that there have got to be Democrats out there who are wise to what Schumer is up to, or at least more than John Fetterman, and who will come to the realization that this makes no sense for, what they believe in, and they are believers in government.
So last question. This is the hardest of hard no's from the leader of the Republicans to the demands of the Democrats to add the spending to the short-term bill. Am I hearing you right? No, not now, not ever, never.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Senator John Thune, always a pleasure to talk to you, Leader. Continued good luck in getting things like the rules reform through that you did, the nominations through, the One Big Beautiful bill. You are level-headed, and we like level-headed leaders. I appreciate your time. John Campbell, former congressman from California, is our expert on Gavin Newsom and all things California, and on the radical left, because he lived in California for so long before he fled to Arizona. Congressman, President Trump has just posted a new Truth Social, which I want to read to get your reaction to. I have been briefed on the deadly shooting at the ICE field office in Dallas. It's now been revealed the deranged shooter wrote anti-ICE on his shell casing. This is despicable. The brave men and women of ICE are just trying to do their jobs and remove the worst of the worst criminals out of our country, but they are facing unprecedented increasing threats, violence, and attack by deranged radical leftists. This violence is the result of radical left Democrats constantly demonizing law enforcement, calling for ICE to be demolished, comparing ICE officers to Nazis. The continuing violence from radical left terrorists in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination must be stopped. ICE officers and other brave members of law enforcement are under grave threat. We've already declared Antifa a terrorist organization. I'll be signing an executive order this week to dismantle these domestic terrorism networks. And then in all caps, I'm calling on all Democrats to stop this rhetoric against ICE and America's law enforcement right now. The Trump administration is fully committed to backing law enforcement, strong borders, securing our homeland, deporting violent illegal criminals, and fully rooting out left-wing domestic terrorism that is terrorizing our country. Thank you for attention to this matter. And quote, your reaction, John Campbell.
I agree with every single word of it, as I do with almost every single word of much of what President Trump is doing these days. When he calls on Democrats to stand down, there's no evidence of that happening so far. Certainly after Charlie Kirk, you would have thought there might have been a little more sorrow, a little contrition, a little compassion from their side, but not at all. Not at all. They were much more concerned about the TV shows being pulled off the air for all of 3 days than they were people being killed. So there's no indication that they will back off. What would make them back off? Only if they felt it was truly hurting them politically and that this wasn't advancing their cause or their agenda. But the left of the Democratic Party, we used to say the far left, the this, that, and the other. It appears that's the core of the Democratic Party today. That is the base of the Democratic Party. And no party can run away from their base. So if that's truly their base, and their base loves this stuff and eats it up, then I don't see them stopping it. I want to be wrong. I truly want to be wrong about this. But I mean, we talked about Gavin Newsom. I heard
well, let me play a couple of clips from Gavin so that the audience who didn't hear it earlier. Gavin Newsom last night, before the murders in Dallas of the 2 migrants with a third seriously injured, when a radical leftist, judging by the available evidence, we don't know much about his back file yet, attacked the ICE field office in Dallas early this morning. Well, last night, hours before that, Gavin Newsom said cut number 14.
You raised
Putin-type election. Cut number 15 is even better.
I fear that we will not have an election in 2028. I really mean that.
All right, John Campbell, that's lunacy. That's really lunacy. Why does he do that?
Everything Gavin Newsom has done since January has been in his pursuit of his next office, which is President of the United States. He is clearly checked out of California and doesn't care. I'm not sure he ever cared about Californians, but he certainly doesn't now. Everything he's doing is geared towards that run. And, think about this. And the other thing about Gavin Newsom that people should understand is he has no core principles, no core beliefs, no fundamental values. His whole persona is ambition. And he will go anywhere he needs to, support anything he needs to serve his own ambition. This is a guy who went on Charlie Kirk's show some months ago because
he invited Charlie to his office. Charlie went to Gavin's show. Yeah.
Right. Charlie went to Gavin's show. This is a guy who did that some months ago because he felt that being more moderate and also said maybe men shouldn't compete in women's sports and women's bathrooms when he thought being more moderate might help him. He has now decided it didn't help him and it's not helping him. And now that Kamala appears to be either functionally out or otherwise out of the race, Gavin Newsom is leading the 2028 race. But right on his heels is AOC. And CNN, I actually saw a report on CNN. If you want to learn about Democrats, watch CNN. They were saying that AOC is in a much better position versus Gavin Newsom today than Bernie Sanders was versus Hillary Clinton prior to the 2016 election. In other words, that if she were to run for president, that she probably will eclipse where Gavin Newsom is. Gavin Newsom's got to know this. So I think he's doing all this, figuring that his main competition now is AOC. You look at all the other Democrats, they're all going to be also-rans, I would think. But AOC is carrying the mantle of Bernie Sanders. She is the heir apparent to the Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders basically won the primaries in 2016 and 2020. So Gavin knows this, and I think he's decided he needs to be as far left as she is, or maybe even further to the left. And he clearly has decided that being anti-Trump is the way for him to stay on top of those polls. So this is all, in my opinion, and I follow the guy's entire career, back to when he was mayor of San Francisco and know him pretty well, is that this is all to serve his ambition to be president, and this is what he thinks will politically help him in a primary.
Well, you're around normal people. I'm around normal people. By normal people, I mean people who don't live and breathe politics. I think they'll think he's insane and that the Pacific Palisades isn't rebuilt and California's broke and the schools don't work and Gavin was eating out at the restaurant during COVID and now he's saying there's not going to be elections in 2028 and not condemning violence when people are getting murdered left and right, including Charlie and the victims this month. Do the normal people like this? I don't think so.
Well, but Gavin is he is without any principles, but he's not dumb, and he is politically pretty astute, and so I would not discount him. Now, look at another thing he's done lately. They've done everything they can to drive the price of gasoline up in California and to drive oil and gas companies out. Well, now with the latest two refineries being shut down, about to be shut down, Valero and Phillips 66, people are talking about $8 to $10 a gallon gas in California. Gavin knows if gas is $8 to $10 in California and it's still $2.50 in Oklahoma, that's not going to help him running nationally. So what did he do? Rumors are he offered Valero $200 million to not shut down their refinery in Benicia, California. Valero, by the way, which I own stock, smartly, in my opinion, said no. For 25 years, you have tried to drive us out of this state. You've made it more and more difficult to operate. We're not taking the bait. We're not doing it. That refinery is shutting down as planned. And Phillips 66 is shutting one down in Southern California in Wilmington. And from a state that 40 years ago had 40 refineries, there will be 11. And so California will have to import refined product, not just oil. They're importing most of their oil from overseas now, but they'll have to import gas. So Gavin's trying to do something because $8 a gallon gas will hurt him in his presidential race. And that's all this is about. That's all.
We'll get our California update again next week from John Campbell. Follow him at JBT Campbell on X and Through the Chaos, the newsletter on Substack. During the break, I was looking for and failed to find any additional update on the radical who shot and killed 2 migrants at the ICE facility after firing randomly at the facility in a van. He did not hit any law enforcement officers. He did kill 2 people in detention, I assume they're migrants, and critically wound a third before turning his hunting rifle on himself. And so it is a presumptively, always could be disproven, presumptively left-wing radical. I just can't imagine a right-winger of any sort doing that. It's not their targets. You could always worry about Islamist violence. If a synagogue was targeted, you could worry about right-wing violence if blacks were targeted, such as at the grocery store shooting in Buffalo or the Mother Emanuel shooting. You could worry about racists then, but this is political violence 2 weeks after Charlie was killed. It's really quite remarkable what is happening in the country. It's a return to the 60s, and the permission structure, as Danny Pletka said, is there. John Campbell, I have to make a mental note. American Legislative Exchange Council is our sponsor. And Jonathan Williams comes on a lot. I've got to ask him where the refineries in America are. He'll know. American Legislative Exchange Council knows everything about every state. And John Campbell just tossed off, because he's a native Californian who fled the state like I did. I'm not a native Californian, but I lived there for 30 years. That when he was a young man, there were 40 refineries in California, 40, and now there are 11, with 2 about to close. And so I got to ask American Legislative Exchange Council Chief Economist Jonathan Williams, when he comes back on next, where do we refine our product? And I know there's a lot in Louisiana, there's some in Texas. Where else do we do it? And We need refined product. We got to, if the blue states don't want it, it's going to be, if they're not going to refine it, it's going to become like nuclear waste. All right? There are very few places to take low-level nuclear waste because nobody wants to build them, and the states that have them don't want to allow out-of-state people to dump their waste in those facilities. There's some interstate commerce issues there. I've been teaching it for years. But pretty soon, I expect states that refine product to refuse to sell product to states that won't refine it. And states like California that make it, I mean, $8 a gallon gasoline, that might actually get Steve Hilton elected. And you should be voting against Prop 50. But I will ask Jonathan Williams what he's next on. In the meantime, I'm going to get richstatespoorstates.com, which you should as well, and compare the states where I know the refining capacity with the states where there isn't for economic growth factors. It's not a determinative of your future, but if you're not going to produce energy in some way, I don't know that you get to live off of Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, North Dakota, the people that produce power. I don't think it's like being a vampire, sucking the lifeblood out of the country and not doing anything when you're sitting on your own oil, but making it impossible for people to get to it. That's a question for Jonathan. And in the meantime, I'll watch the State of the States newsletter, which you can get if you go to alec.org. Great sponsors for a long, long time. As is Relief Factor. Relief Factor is a great sponsor. I did my 6.2 miles this morning after having Monday and Tuesday off, and I'm fine. It's great. I think we're going to be rained on for the next couple of days, so it might be a couple of days off. It's not good to do 2 off, 1 on, 2 off. But you know what? Doesn't hurt me because I take my Relief Factor. If you're watching the show at the beginning, first hour, I took it on the air. If you're watching on the Salem News Channel, I always take it on the air so you can see it. You hear it over the radio network. And I do it once an hour, and I remind you once an hour because I want to remind you to exercise, and I want to remind you to try Relief Factor. $19.95. $19.95 is a 3-week starter pack. If you don't like it, you don't have to renew it, all right? But if you do like it, be like me, you'll take it for 12 years. And it's the only supplement I've taken for many, many years, for one simple reason. Relief Factor works. Call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. Ask for the starter pack, $19.95, or go to relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Want to play J.D. Vance again, cut number 19.
And I think that is the most disgusting thing. The very people who keep us safe ought to be honored and protected and praised by Democrats and Republicans alike. It is time to stop the rhetorical assault on law enforcement. Because here's what happens. Because here's what happens when Democrats like Gavin Newsom did say that these people are part of an authoritarian government. When the left-wing media lies about what they're doing, when they lie about who they're arresting, when they lie about the actual job of law enforcement, what they're doing is encouraging crazy people to go and commit violence. You don't have to agree with my immigration policies. You don't have to agree with Donald Trump's immigration policies. But if your political rhetoric encourages violence against our law enforcement, you can go straight to hell, and you have no place in the political conversation of the United States of America.
I'm Hugh Hewitt. Selena Zito is a columnist for the Washington Examiner, the Washington Post, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and many other places. She wrote a fabulous story this week on revivalism in America, the return to public Christianity in the public square. And I will talk with her about that. But first, Selena, another act of deadly left-wing violence. That's what it appears to be. I will be happy to confess if it isn't tomorrow. But writing anti-ICE on the bullets is pretty dispositive in my view. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's pretty, and look, I get the sense that a lot of people that are speaking in politics, and I'm just going to focus on Democrats right now, because they're the ones that are being the most inflammatory about ICE, calling them the Gestapo, calling them slave patrol, calling them Nazis. You know, it dehumanizes people. So what do I mean by that? It takes the idea that this is someone just like you and turns them into something not only other, but also evil. And it is an entrance for, in particular, it seems to be young people who have become so some of them who have become so desensitized through through avatars in gaming, or or whatever sort of activities that they're using that doesn't interact with people, right? It's more of an online activity. And it makes it easy for them to be able to do it and say, this is not wrong. We have to stop dehumanizing the people that we disagree with. We can disagree with them on points, but we can't turn them into monsters, because for some people, it's okay to target monsters and kill them.
Now, Selena, I think it's possible to hold two thoughts. A decade ago, longer than that, Sarah Palin was blamed for the shooting of Gabby Giffords because and that was ridiculous, because she had a target on a political advertising and because the killer of Gabby Giffords, or the shooter of Gabby Giffords and the killer of the federal judge, was schizophrenic and deranged and had voices in his head. This shooter wrote anti-ICE on his casing. Charlie's killer wrote "Catch it, fascist." These are politically inspired people. I think you can say the Sarah Palin stuff is nuts, but this is left-wing violence. Do you agree with my assessment?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to dispute that, if there's evidence out there that this is not the case, as to your point, I'll be happy to say this is not the case. However, it's really hard to not see that line going from point to point.
Now, I do want to make sure we talk about your article on the public witness of Christianity that happened in Pittsburgh last week or 2 weeks ago. Would you give us the circumstances and why you were surprised by it?
So it happened last week, and it was the second week in a row since Charlie was killed. It was a revival. This one was inspired by a young linebacker for Pitt, the captain of the Pitt football team. A lot of other Pitt football players were there. I actually wasn't surprised about this. I've been following this young Christian revivalism that for the past couple of years in Western Pennsylvania, but also in Ohio and Kentucky. And I think we really need to think about this scenario. In the 1960s, when you and I were young, the counterculture were the hippies, right? It was anti-establishment. It was a pushback against post-World War II traditionalism and capitalism. There are some things that came good out of it, like the Civil Rights Act and the equal pay for women. But it was just left when it was adopted. It became it became further left as it continued to grab hold of our cultural curators and corporations, institutions, academia, and legacy media, until it became the status quo. And it wasn't until COVID that young people, and the aftermath of that young people decided to be the counterculture revolution against that. And I see it incrementally all the time. I look at my landscaper, the woman who cleans my house, the woman who does my hair, all under the age of 30, and they are part of this movement. And so I think that the counterculture revolution is here, and it is a correction of what happened in the 1960s.
Now, you will remember the Jesus people, and the Jesus people are 68, 69, 70. Is it going to reach that level of cultural awareness? Now, there's no Time magazine anymore on which you can put the Jesus people on the cover. And the movie that about Greg Laurie was made, and it's in the past, it's in the can, people can watch it. But do you think it's going to happen again?
Oh, it already is happening. I mean, I see it all the time with young people on the ground in the areas that I cover, in Appalachia, in the Midwest, in places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. It's very real, it's very tangible. And the reason we don't have them on the cover of Time magazine or in the New York Times is because reporters really struggle with covering American faith movements. mainly because, not because they're bad people, but they just don't understand it. They don't see it when it's right in front of them because it's not something that has been culturally part of their life or they have rejected along the way. But if you
A
live
quick
in
exit question, Selena. Leader Thune told me the only Democrat he expects to vote against shutting down the government is John Fetterman. Have you had a chance to talk to Senator Fetterman about the shutdown yet?
No, I haven't, but I suspect he's exactly right.
I will be interested. He's going to become, actually, I'm going to go out on a limb here. He might make a great presidential candidate for the Democratic Party that's not nuts. And I think it's probably half of the Democratic Party, but there aren't a lot of people running for president who aren't pandering to the nuts. What do you think of that?
What the challenge is the primaries, right? When the people the furthest left are the most motivated to show up in a Democratic primary.
Oh, I don't think he'd win. I just think he would give voice to people who aren't going to have any voice in the Democratic Party, and they ought to beg him to run just to keep him. Andy Bashir does not really have juice in the way that John Fetterman does. Selena Zito, thank you. Follow her on X at Zito Selena. I have already upped and reposted on X her piece about Christian revivalism in Pittsburgh. I think it's fabulous and fascinating. Go and read that. I'm trying to find out more about the murderer who is himself dead, having turned the gun on himself. He used his parents' rifle, allegedly. Not certain about anything else other than he last voted in a Democratic primary in March of 2020. And don't know much beyond that. Overnight, people will dive into it. We'll find out more about whether or not he's got any association with any other radicals and radical ideology. I do want to tell you that there are many reports that James Comey will be indicted very soon. And they're from NBC and CNBC and MSNBC. So they're based on leaks, obviously, out of the United States Attorney's Office, I would suspect, Northern District of Virginia, or D.C., having to do with his testimony to Congress and lying under oath. I'll report that if it's confirmed before the end of the program. Let me tell you about our sponsor, Consumer Cellular, which I do once a day because I'm trying to save you people money. Go to consumercellular.com/Hugh for more details. Remember, my code is Hugh25. You'll get $5 off, whatever you do, in the first 5 months of your invoice. They have a lot of different opportunities. It takes 20 minutes to switch from the cell phone company that is not charging the right amount of money. Even if you get unlimited data, if you're over 50, Consumer Cellular wants to be your cellular company and you want unlimited data, 2 lines for $60. That's $30 a line. Their phone number, 1-800-411-4454, 1-800-411-4454. That's consumercellular.com/Hugh. But if you call the phone number, 1-800-411-4454, and you want the deal, Hugh25, say, Hewitt told me to call Hugh25. That's the code, Hugh25. Talk to me about your data plans. Now, you should get your phone bill out first, right? You should know how much you're paying, because they'll beat it. They'll be able to beat it. Take 20 minutes to make the switch. Keep your number, keep your device, keep all your data and your contacts. Just save money, even if you're an unlimited data user. But the important thing is get your phone bill out and find out how much data you're actually using. If you're over 50, you're not actually using that much data. It's made for gamers and people who watch a lot of movies on their phone, and that's not you. If you're a normal 50-year-old, you're kind of watching TV or football or the Guardians beat the Tigers tonight. Sorry, Detroit. Not sorry, Detroit. And consumercellular.com/Hugh is where you go to save a lot of money. You can have savings without sacrifice. You have the same great cell service as every other carrier in America. They're all the same. Just compete on price and get the best price. And because Consumer Cellular targets 50 and older, I mean, they'll do it for you. You're younger. You want 2 unlimited lines, talk to them. But if you're over 50, they know it's great because you're not going to use it. You might use it maybe 1 month, 2 months. But the deal, 1-800-411-4454. The deal is Hugh25, $5 each off of your first 5 invoices. And remember, in an hour and 40 minutes, the Guardians play the Tigers, who are falling apart. They're like the Black Knight of baseball. I'm sorry, Mark Peterson, my friend indeed from high school days. He's a Tigers fan. I'm not sorry, but I am sorry, Mark, that you got a ball tonight for a ball club. Shouldn't say that, shouldn't jinx the Indians. Sorry. Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired United States Navy senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Admiral, I've been spending a lot of today talking with people about things I didn't anticipate because of the murders in Dallas by yet another apparently lefty radical. But I want to make sure I get back to what I asked you to talk about today, which is President Trump said, shoot down Russian airplanes when they enter into NATO airspace. All right. You've had to do war games a lot in your life. What happens if that happens?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, I think we do need to say this, right? We need to deter them because Putin's been testing us. The drones into Poland, the drones into Romania, the MiG-31s into Estonia. This is a test. This is him testing Secretary General Rutte of NATO, President Trump, and the Western European leaders. We have to respond by saying we will take action. And the president said that really clearly. Now, once that happens, that's a great question you're asking. And my gut reaction is if you show immediately your ability to pop up, get an aircraft up, armed on top of the Russian aircraft and to escort it out, you won't have to shoot it. If the Russian shoots first, I'm confident the rules of engagement will be generally, you can only shoot if the Russian enables a weapon and maneuvers in a way that makes you think you're at risk. In other words, self-defense. I think both sides will have restrictive rules of engagement and nothing will happen. But the problem is if we don't do this, if we don't respond. And so in a war game, it's not that you escalate to de-escalate, but you escalate to control the problem. And I think to control Vladimir Putin, President Trump said exactly what you needed to say, as did Mike Waltz in New York over the last 3 days.
So you're telling me, no, don't worry, it's not going to happen. I'm going to ask you, okay, I'm not worried. But if it happens, what do the Russians do? All right, first of all, will we be able to shoot down whatever they send over, given if they send their best fighter jet over, can we shoot it down?
Well, the good news is the United States has been selling F-35s like hotcakes in Europe for the last decade. And there's a number of countries that have F-35s, including ones that are participating in Baltic air policing, which is the mission that's up in the Baltic region right now. So F-35s actually, in a terrible expenditure of missiles, shot down, $20,000 drones with $1 million missiles over Poland. So the planes are there. Look, you ask what would happen if this began to escalate. Putin's not in a position to escalate this. That's why he's being performative. That's why these drones and these MiG-31s are performative. He's trying to tell the rest of Europe NATO's a paper tiger, which of course is what the president called him yesterday, because he can't do anything. He has way too many forces, way too much of his logistics, his whole command and control trapped in Ukraine right now in a war he cannot win.
So, Admiral, in a column that will be in Fox tomorrow, I describe President Trump as an A to B guy, meaning I'm at A, I want to go to B, I'm going to get to B. If I can't get to B one way, I'll get to B another way. A to B in Ukraine was to try and get Putin to back down and figure out a deal. Putin's not backing down. The next way to B, to ending the war, is to arm up Ukraine. I think that's his next B. Do you agree with my assessment of the president, A to B guy, and do you agree with the second B?
I do agree, and I think he's his intent was in the right place here. I've been critical of some things, but I have to tell you, ending that war was the right intent. So A to B. Look, the way to B right now is to arm Ukraine. Now, he was specific. He's not going to arm Ukraine the way his predecessor did. He's going to arm Ukraine by providing our defense industrial base and everything in it to the European allies. And he said NATO, which is interesting because that kind of includes us, but I'm assuming he didn't include us, to deliver new weapon procurement to Ukraine. What I hope he also allows is the delivery of the weapons they previously had ordered for them, either with their own money or in some cases with our money. Stuff that was ordered 2, 3, and 4 years ago is now ready for delivery. I hope he lets that go through, even though it's U.S. assistance, and in theory, he could block it. I think in practice, the right thing to do here is to push that. It's already paid for. Push the sales from Europe and helps American workers, and let the Ukrainians roll with both defensive and offensive weapons to put Russia at further risk.
Now, you mentioned Secretary General Rutte. Does he have command and control over NATO forces, or is that under the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO?
So that's under the day-to-day operations and the actual execution of, say, a Baltic air policing turning into a combat operation is under the SACEUR, General Grinchevich, call sign Grinch, an Air Force four-star general who is both the U.S. European commander, the commander of all U.S. forces in Europe, and the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, the commander of all NATO forces.
His call sign is Grinch?
He's
like
great.
that.
He worked for me. I've known him I was at UCOM with him for 2.5 years. He was a colonel and I was a 1-star. I have complete confidence. He is Belarusian, I think, by extraction from several generations. He's fantastic. He is driven. He has all the skills you need to work with NATO, which means diplomatic skills, and all the warfighting skills to work with Putin, which means kinetic skills. He brings the whole package.
Well said. All right, now I'm going to switch completely because I was in Connecticut on Monday night doing an event for our local affiliates up there in the state GOP. Got to talk to Commander French, a bunch of other people who are running for office up there. And we talked a lot about electric boat. And they got to go from 15,000 employees to 25,000 employees in the next few years. There's no place for these young people to live. Do you think Congress, as part of manning up our industrial base, has got to provide for housing for people so that they can work at the shipyards where we have graving docks?
Well, I got to be careful here. I would say gently that if the United States government's paying for high-paying, and these are good-paying jobs, as I'm sure you heard, these are good-paying jobs in Connecticut. I think Connecticut, as a state, even a blue state, they got to work their way through how they create good living conditions, schools, highways, utilities, and housing. I'm not sure the government's ready in a private yard to provide that kind of stipend. Now, they can provide stipends because it's more expensive to live in Connecticut than it is in Mississippi or Alabama. But I'm
Wisconsin,
not sure.
you go work for the guys up making the frigates in Wisconsin. You can buy a farm for what you can get an apartment in Connecticut.
Well, I'll tell you, Senator Wicker would have to sign off on this, and as a strong supporter of the Mississippi yards, we'll have to see how that goes down.
But they don't build some. I'm going A to B here, and I heard a lot about how much money the youngs can make in Connecticut, and I heard how you got a career path as well. When you go from 15,000 employees to 25,000 employees over 20 years, you're going to have a career path. You're going to advance in seniority and pay, but the barriers to entry in Connecticut are extraordinary, Admiral. They're like California, extraordinary.
So you're asking me, can we solve this? Yes. What's going to be the exact vehicle? I don't know that it'll be housing stipends. It might be that they account for a higher pay in that. Look, we have to do that sometimes in Hawaii around the public shipyards there. In some of our public shipyards, we have to do that. Historically, with private shipyards, we let the market control that. But I think you're right. Look, we don't have a choice. We're fully invested in Connecticut as a submarine center of excellence and a center of gravity for U.S. maritime industrial base. So something's going to happen, Hugh. I'm not willing to say it's a stipend yet because I just think there'd be a political hit on that. But something can be arranged to account for the higher cost of living, and these are great jobs. Kids in high school, teachers need to be pushing them vocationally to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and then very specifically into getting the skill sets that are required to be a welder, an electrician, a pipe fitter. These are very quickly six-figure jobs.
That's very obvious to me, Admiral. So last question about electric boat specifically. I don't want to put you in any conflict sort of situation. To the extent you can say, do we defend those yards well? Because we've got everything riding on the Columbia class and the Virginia class, and that's where we make them. Do we have them, defended well in the air and the sky and around the sea and all that kind of stuff?
So here's what I'd say. First, we need to worry about the physical security of them against a terrorist attack, even in one that's a false flag of like a foreign country. And we need to protect them against cyber attacks. I don't know if you see what's going on with with Jaguar in England, but they're going to not be functioning for months over a ransomware attack. So we got to protect against those right now. Look, a missile attack on these, it isn't like in a war production. We should be able to protect them. That's what Golden Dome's about. They're not uniquely protected. The only place in America that is uniquely protected against a cruise missile attack is the Washington National Capital Region, from the Pentagon to Capitol Hill.
I'm glad I live there. Admiral, good to talk to you as always. I love that you will switch subjects with me and that I learned call signs about our new Allied Supreme Commander, Grinch. Thank you, Admiral Montgomery. Google is thanking its lucky stars that this is a huge news day today with everything going on. Comey being indicted, the killer in Dallas, the crazy rhetoric of Gavin Newsom, Jimmy Kimmel. Because they chose today, Jim Jordan released today, Google's admission that they deplatformed a bunch of conservatives because of Biden-era administration pressure. And when you deplatform someone, you ruin their reach and you ruin their revenue. I got a YouTube channel. I hope you sign up for it. It's great. I push out my clips to you. I want you to see what I do. And if Salem makes some money out of it, that's great too. But I really want you to see my interviews. So did my old colleague, Seb Gorka, Dr. Seb. Dr. Gorka is now the Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council. Well, they deplatformed Seb. When do they send him a check? I was on with John Roberts on Fox earlier to talk about this. Cut number one.
All right, let's bring in Hugh Hewitt now, Fox News contributor and host of the Hugh Hewitt Show. I just want to add a little bit to what Lydia was reporting in this letter from Dan Donovan to Jim Jordan. They acknowledged that the Biden administration put pressure on them and they caved. The letter says senior Biden administration officials, including White House officials, conducted repeated and sustained outreach to Alphabet, that's Google's parent company, and pressed the company regarding certain user-generated content related to the COVID-19 pandemic that did not violate its policies. It is unacceptable and wrong when any government, including the Biden administration, attempts to dictate how the company moderates content. Yet again, the company, Google, Alphabet, YouTube, just completely folded like a cheap suit.
Well, better late than never, John. Good afternoon to you. Senator Eric Schmidt, as was referenced in the report, wrote an entire chapter in his new book about this. I interviewed him last week about the censorship enterprise. The book's called The Last Line of Defense if people want the details. People set up YouTube accounts for two reasons: reach and revenue, especially if they're in the political commentary business. I've got a YouTube account. The fellows over at the Ruthless Podcast have a YouTube account. So did Steve Bannon, now Deputy Director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, now Senior Director at the NSC, Dr. Seb Gorka. They all had YouTube accounts for reach and for revenue. Google took those down. So they damaged those people. So I want to know, is Google going to make it good for the people they deplatform? Are they going to write checks to Bannon and to Bongino and to Dr. Gorka because they lost money when their YouTube station went down? The second thing I want to know is, what else did they deplatform people for? Was it for the Hunter Biden laptop, or was it just COVID? And if it was other things, are they going to restore those channels and make restitution there? And then finally, I want to know, have they switched the algorithm so that they do not discriminate against conservative content? Now, Mr. Donovan said in his letter to the chairman that they want conservatives like me and like the others who were banned. I was not banned. I was never banned. But they want us on their platform, but do their algorithms send us traffic, and do they help our reach extend? I don't know about that. This is the beginning of the investigation, not the end. But boy, they owe some people some money.
Yeah, well, that's a very pertinent point that you make there about the algorithm. So there seem to be two things at work here. YouTube, first of all, caved to the Biden administration, but then they also did some censoring on their own outside of the requests from the Biden administration. Donovan goes on to say in his letter, the company terminated channels for repeatedly violating its community guidelines on elections integrity content through 2023 and COVID-19 content through 2024. Today, YouTube's community guidelines allow for a wider range of content regarding COVID-19 and elections integrity. Well, there you get confirmation that it wasn't just COVID, it was election integrity as well. But they're saying that the community guidelines now allow for a broader discussion of ideas, which really, I think, indicates that that stuff should have never been deplatformed in the first place.
Absolutely not. You're completely correct, John. The question is, who's the censors? There are censors at Google. What are they censoring? What are their points of view, and why are they censoring what they're censoring? Again, I bring up the Hunter Biden laptop because that got a lot of people deplatformed and shut down on a lot of different places. It was completely true. It was 100% legitimate, probably determined the 2020 election going to President Biden, because that story didn't get out. It was delegitimized by social media. So going forward, the question is, show us your guidelines, show us your algorithm, tell us who your censors are, and don't shut down people with whom you disagree. Don't shoot at them, don't shut them down. Have a debate, engage in civic debate. If you don't like someone, argue it out with them, and by all means, at length, set up your own YouTube channel and have the argument that you want to have. But I think Senator Schmidt is the guy who is absolutely exonerated. Supreme Court protected Google and the Biden administration in the Murthy case, arguing that there wasn't standing for these people, Missouri, to sue the Biden administration. But we now know that 86 people out of the Biden administration worked social media, 20 of them out of the White House. It wasn't like Brendan Carr, whose job it is to work FCC licensees about what is appropriate or not appropriate. That's in law. These people took it upon themselves at the White House and the other parts of the administration to shut down speech that was their political opponent. That is the antithesis of the First Amendment. And I'm glad Google has seen the light. I just wish, I'd like more details, and I hope Jim Jordan keeps going and has them in and asks them more questions about who else did you shut down, for how long, and how you're going to make them whole.
Well, if we know Jim Jordan, he's just getting started. He's not about to stop. By the way, we've got Senator Schmidt on coming up in our 2 o'clock hour, so we look forward to that. Hugh, always great to have you on. Thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate it.
I love talking to John Robert. John's really smart, and it gives you space to answer a question. I really like talking to him. I also like AndrewandTodd.com. They are sponsors of my show and have been for 15 years. Andrew Del Rey's been my friend for 25. I missed Bible study again today because everything's upside down in my world in the aftermath of Charlie's murder. And I'm sorry, guys. But Andrew and Todd won't miss your call, 888-888-1172. 888-888-1172. If you've got to buy a house, or you need to refinance a house to get money out of your house. And that's usually what's going on right now. People are stressed, or they have to make payments, and they want to consolidate debt. Andrew always reminds me when we're talking offline, not in our Bible study, but when we're talking offline, he always reminds me to tell people, yeah, you might have a 3% loan, but what's the total cost of your debt? Well, some credit cards charge 12, 14, 20%. The total amount of your debt and whatever the total cost of your debt is the question that will govern whether or not you ought to refinance your house, take money out of it, or simply take that debt, pay it off, and roll it into your house debt at a higher rate over 30 years. It's just math. It's hard math, though, not what do we call it, calculus, but it's hard. That's why Andrew and Todd are there. They will walk you through it step by step, and if it makes sense to refinance your house, or if you got to buy a house, they'll do it because they're lenders with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. Go to andrewandtodd.com or call them at 888-888-1172. Don't forget Relief Factor. Coming up after the break, Mary Catherine Ham. I probably should send her some. Mary Catherine's always working out. Steve, her husband's always working out. Relief Factor works. I got my 6.2 miles in my 10K route, and I think it's going to be raining all day tomorrow, so I don't have to worry about it. But I won't feel bad. I took Monday and Tuesday off after a tenner on the weekend, and I'm great because Relief Factor really does work. Gets rid of the minor aches and pains that come with exercise and aging. You're definitely doing the latter. Should be doing the former. Start with a little, go for longer over time, and take Relief Factor every day. Call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF, or go to their website, find that starter pack for $19.95 at less than $1 a day at relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. The stuff really does work. I've taken it for decades for that reason. Relief Factor. Only supplement I take, only one I'm ever going to take, relieffactor.com. Sarah Bedford is senior investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner. Follow her on X at Sarah C. Bedford. Sarah, it is my policy not to use the names of murderers and killers and terrorists on the show, but I have been trying to find out anything about the guy who killed the migrants in Texas trying to kill ICE agents. Have you got any leads yet? Anyone flash anything reliable? I don't know what to trust online.
Yeah, it's hard to know these days, especially when a lot of the legacy news outlets have sort of an interest in obfuscating the truth behind some of these acts of political violence. What we do know is that this alleged perpetrator, had anti-ICE messages scrawled on the ammunition that authorities found him with. And that is something that we've seen now in the Charlie Kirk case, in the Luigi Mangione case. We have seen these sort of, at times, left-wing aligned alleged perpetrators have these sort of radical messages scrawled on ammunition. So that has certainly raised some red flags for authorities.
So I want to talk to you about the shutdown. Leader Thune was on earlier today, gave me the hardest no. I said, is this the hardest no you can give? And he said, you got it. Right. We're not going to budge. Do the Democrats take the same line? Are they just not going to budge?
That seems to be their move right now. I mean, they are trying to take hostages that they just don't have. They don't really have any leverage, the Democrats right now. They might have some at the end of the year when a longer term funding bill is negotiated. But right now, Republicans are just asking for a 7-week clean stopgap funding bill, and they are not willing to make concessions now. Perhaps that will change when the end of the calendar year is reached and there are more discussions about the longer term budget bill. But no, Republicans have no incentive to budge right now. Democrats are the ones who think that government shutdowns are the worst things that could possibly happen to the federal government. Republicans are sort of like, bring it on right now.
Well, Leader Thune said in April, Chuck Schumer said, well, we can't let OMB decide who's critical or not. And if the same logic applies, you turn Russ Vought loose, and he's going to bring the axe. I'm going to talk with Lee Zeldin tomorrow. I'm pretty sure that they're going to find 90% of EPA is not critical, right? It's not going to be the Department of Defense that gets laid off.
Right. It's shocking that Democrats would want to give Russ Vought this much power over the federal government for what could be an indefinite period of time for this shutdown. But I don't think what Democrats are looking for here is results of any kind. They just want to show their base that they're quote unquote fighting, that they are pushing back in some sort of aggressive, tangible way against the Trump administration agenda. What the hardcore left base has to say about Democrats is that they don't think they're fighting hard enough against the Trump agenda, which is really hard to understand as someone who covers this every day and sees how much opposition there has been to the Trump agenda. But if you're a leftist voter, that's your perception of Democrats. And so you just want the fight for the fight's sake. They're not really looking for any outcomes here.
Now, Sarah, one of the interesting, curious Beltway things that the leader told me is that when the Democrats did the Inflation Reduction Act, they got it through the Byrd rule, and they were able to do spending through it. He didn't rule out, because I asked him, are you going to do a reconciliation with spending in it? And he said, well, they opened the door to that when they did it, so we got some extra stuff in it because of what they did in the One Big Beautiful Bill, so he's not taking anything off the table. Do you imagine the Republicans playing hardball and doing a reconciliation as an end around?
Well, I don't know what their options would be if Democrats are a hard no matter what, and there's no path forward for at least this short-term spending bill. Republicans have shown some openness to working with the Democrats on things like the Obamacare subsidies when it comes to the end of the year. Those don't expire until December 31st. And there's no incentive for Republicans to grant concessions now when there will be another gun to their head when the CR expires. That's the time when Republicans are saying, okay, let's come to the negotiating table. And so to get us through this first fiscal deadline to that point, I do see Republicans looking at all options.
And I don't know Russ very well, Vought. I've only met him once. But he worked for John Campbell, and John Campbell tells me he's a brilliant, brilliant guy. Do you think they're going to live to regret this in terms of what happened? I don't think we're going to pay back pay, by the way. Except for the essential employee, I don't think we're going to pay anyone.
It is entirely possible that Democrats could live to regret this. Russ Vought is certainly not losing any sleep over the prospect of a government shutdown. And, it's interesting that Democrats would be willing to let this happen when in just a few weeks at this point, Abigail Spanberger is running for governor in Virginia where,
I hadn't even thought of that.
Potentially a majority of federal workers could be affected from a shutdown. Many of them Democratic voters. That could be a factor in Democratic thinking.
Did she vote for the budget in the House?
I do not believe that she did, but don't quote me on that.
All right, I'm going to go look because you're right. Spanberger's already falling. Winsome Sears already rising. Good angle, Sarah C. Bedford. Follow her on X, Sarah C. Bedford from the Washington Examiner. Thank you, Sarah. Mary Catherine Ham, of course, is a Fox News contributor. She is the co-host of Getting Hammered, which is back. There's a new edition of it. I listened to it today, and it made me sad because Mary Catherine has her arms around the left-wing violence problem. Mary Catherine, I want to go right to the heart of it. I want everyone to go listen to Getting Hammered. I didn't know you'd done it. Vic told me yesterday. And I want to begin by running down the list of left-wing and right-wing violence, plus the mentally deranged violence, and then have you talk about it. On the left-wing side, I've got today's shooting in Dallas, because the evidence seems pretty dispositive that a left-winger killed one migrant, maybe two, trying to kill ICE agents. We've got the assassination of Charlie. We got the bombing of the Fox News van on September 12th. We had another ICE attack. Actually, we had 3 other ICE shootings at ICE facilities in July and August. We had the shooting of an ABC affiliate after Kimmel was canceled last week.
Right.
Add in the 2 attacks on Donald Trump, one of which killed Corey Compatore, the murder of Brian Thompson, the healthcare CEO, December of 2024, attempt to kill Justice Kavanaugh in 2022, the attempted massacre of the GOP caucus on the baseball field in 2017, the murderous attack on the Catholic kids in Minnesota on August 25, the murder of the Christian kids at school in Nashville in 2023. There are some school shootings I don't include if it's a schizophrenic, crazy person, though they're terrible.
Yep.
On right-wing violence, I include January 6th, obviously. I include the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. I include the murder by a neo-Nazi of Heather Heyer, though neo-Nazis are not welcome in the Republican Party, and the murder at Mother Emanuel Church of 9 in 2015. Everything else goes into either crazy people or Islamist violence. So with that on the table, did I miss anything?
I mean, yeah, we could do very full surveys, but the thing that's aggravating about all of this is that the surveys that the media does end up being corrupt in and of themselves, right? Like the data is all wrong, and people can, for instance, with Melissa Hortman, right? There are situations where a political figure is killed or shot at because the person had other than political reasons. Jared Loughner shooting Gabby Giffords is a perfect example because he was schizophrenic and had issues with grammar and an obsession with her. Hinckley is another one, his obsession with Jodie Foster. Melissa Hortman in Minnesota, the guy Vance Bolter, clearly mentally ill and thought Tim Walz was telling him what to do, right? We can just concede that some of these are not political per se, even though they're perpetrated on political people. Charlie's assassination is not that. And they want to make it that. In fact, I listened to Jimmy Kimmel's entire monologue, during which he, of course, is a free speech martyr. And I actually agree that Brendan Carr did the wrong thing in that situation.
Oh, we disagree. We'll come back to that.
Right. What he never concedes is that Charlie's form of speech that he was engaging in was special and protected and important to our democracy, and that his murder was motivated by someone who wanted him to shut up forever, and it was successful, right? He can't give us that. He can't give us
Why do you think? I have a theory as to that. Do you have a theory as to why Kimmel can't give any ground? I do. He'll lose his audience. He can't display actual sympathy for the victim, Charlie, or his family. He can't do it, or his audience will desert him.
You think so? I think, look, I think he tried to show some sympathy, but he wanted to categorize it as random violence. He was like,
yes.
It's just senseless violence, and it was wrong that it happened. It's not random violence. These acts are not random violence, and they're obvious what they are. And I also want to point out that without doing the whole list of events, by the way, we've been told since Charlie Kirk's brutal murder that we are the foreboding right, and that we're coming after, our retaliation will be so dark and terrible. And every single arrestable offense since then that is ostensibly related to the murder of Charlie Kirk has been left on right. It has been left on right. So I can at least inoculate myself from being part of that movement, right? Another thing you can do without going through the list at all, and Michael Moynihan has pointed this out, I think quite elegantly, is that off the top of our heads, Hugh, we could think of 5 convicted, unrepentant domestic terrorists and murderers who are elevated inside an institution that is only the left's, and it is colleges, and they are professors, and they teach children, and they do not need to repent for killing Brinks truck drivers or trying to bomb the Pentagon. None of that is important.
Angela
because-
Davis. Yeah.
Totally fine.
So the
Bernadette
question
Dorn,
is, I've heard
Bill
Senator
Ayers.
Cotton say, more. Senator Cotton has said on this show and in other forums, this is not a both sides thing. This is a left-wing problem. And the more often we say it's a both side thing, because there have been January 6th and the Michigan plot, and there were some crazy people who rioted in the Capitol, we obscure the fact that the radical left's ideology embraces and encourages violence. That's the key. And I think we got to talk about that. Do you agree with that? That the radical left's ideology...
I agree that they embrace, valorize, and reward institutionally violence in a way that our side does not. So, I mean, and the colleges, again, the college professors are this perfect example of this, where Barack Obama did pal around with Bill Ayers, who was part of this group that tried to bomb ROTC guys and the Pentagon, and everyone thought it was offensive to Barack Obama for you to bring this up. It was A-okay for him to not have a moral issue with this.
Now, Mary Catherine, I bring up Saul Alinsky occasionally because I'm old enough to remember when the rules for radicals were a thing. And Obama was steeped in that. President Obama believed in it. Secretary Clinton believed in it. But we don't talk about that anymore. The right wing has never, ever accepted the neo-Nazis or the Birchers. Or Buckley drove them out in the 50s, and they haven't been back since. We don't want the racists. We don't want the violent anti-abortion people. We don't want them. The left doesn't do that. Who should do that? Mamdani, AOC, Jasmine Crockett? Who should be saying this?
I mean, any and all of them, but I think the issue is that violent revolution is part of the romanticized view of these people about what makes them special and what makes their cause unique. And like, sure, maybe Mamdani is not actively encouraging it at the moment. Like, I'm sure you can go back to 2020 and find all sorts of valorization of violence. But these are the folks who believe that violent revolution is necessary to create a more perfect union. We're kind of like, the one revolution was good, and we like what we got out of it.
I'm going to talk with Mary Catherine a little bit off air, and then we'll attach it, put it over at YouTube. Turning Point UCA suffers a staggering blow. Erica touches the hearts of anyone who isn't stone-hearted. If you weren't touched by that, you got to check yourself in somewhere, because that was amazing. Marco Rubio gave a testimony as effective and as efficient as any pastor or priest I've ever heard. It was a wonderful day of worship and mourning and remembrance, and yet the mainstream media doesn't have the language to deal with religious belief, especially Christians who believe in the objective truth of the death, resurrection, ascension, and eventual return of Christ. Do you expect they'll ever develop that? They used to have that muscle. They've lost that muscle.
Again, there's the bubble. This is another related problem for why lefty politicians have trouble reaching people outside of New York City. You know, a couple people confessed it, and I think earnestly said, like, I have no connection to what these people are doing. Thomas Chatterton Williams was one of them. There was another guy who said, hey, this is totally alien to me, all of the signs and the structure and the language and the music. And I'm sure the feeling is symmetrical, like that these people don't know what my life is like. And I was like, no. An important fact to know about American life is it's not symmetrical. The right is steeped in your culture. The right is subjected to your culture on a regular basis, Jimmy Kimmel being one of the avenues for which we are steeped in their ideology and culture and are very familiar with all of its signals and culture and its music and whatever, right? And their bubble is not our bubble, but they assume it is.
But it's their choice. What I want to underscore, they could fix this if they want. It's not that hard to find practicing Catholics. I'm over here. Practicing evangelicals. Mary Catherine's over there. There's some of us who do both, and there are a lot of people like Guy Benson, who I'm not quite sure which church he fits into, but there are lots of us. Do you think that the legacy platforms will ever actively engage in trying to reconnect with that part of America, or do they think they're lost fools?
I think they think they're lost fools. I think they have been steeped in education that teaches them that. I think it is not a value proposition or anything that's going to get them clicks to be good faith about people of faith. and I don't see this changing anytime soon. Often the religion reporters at major outlets are the most hostile people in the newsroom to people of religion. And I'm not sure how you're going to change that quickly or get anyone who understands. I mean, you find like people who write about these discussions on evangelical circles or in Catholic circles are so knowledgeable, so much more knowledgeable than the average religion reporter at a major outlet, right? I listen to those folks about those internal divisions and those debates because they are intelligent and they are interesting and they're engaged in by very smart people of faith. They don't think there are smart people of faith.
That's it. They think we're snake handling, gap-toothed people who came out of the woods. When in fact, I think we have the logical, apologetic, and indeed the only answer. If you caught the opening of my show today, I said something like, when everything seems to be going to hell, you ought to go to church. Now, a lot of you folks out there haven't been to church in years, if ever, but you may have watched Charlie's service and been touched by it, and you may be thinking about going somewhere. I thought I would ask Mary Catherine, since she's a different generation than me, how might someone pick where to go to church if they're feeling after Charlie's service or just because of the panic about the culture at large that they need to find a place to find out about God?
Yeah, look, this is actually tricky. First of all, I think you should pray about it because you might be presented with an option. If you have good friends who you trust, who you would be willing to go to church with, I'm always willing to extend an invitation. By the way, also to reporters or people in media, which I have done on occasion in the past, somewhat in jest, but actually in earnest on X, where I say, I'm glad to be your guide to an SEC tailgate or a church service or a Wednesday night potluck or a gun show. I will take you. And so find somebody to
translate for you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I actually think you'd have fun and you would learn something. But I think find somebody you trust, who you can have these conversations with and whose recommendation you might like, and then try a church. And also, a lot of churches will say, like, try us for 3 weeks and see what happens, right? Put in a little bit of time at one place. If it's not working for you, you can search for something else, but pray about it and ask a trusted friend or two.
Now, do you think, because I do, that there will be a bulge in attendance this Sunday and the next Sunday, and ought pastors, priests, ministers of word and sacrament prepare for that, and perhaps suspend the usual September? September is when you ask people to pledge for the coming year. Usually it's September, sometimes it's October. What do you think about the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, so I think pastors should be aware of this and be prepared for it. One of the things that I saw, one of the liberal critiques of this Charlie Kirk service was, he was like, is that normal with them asking someone to accept Christ in the service? It was an altar call in the very beginning. And then he offered a QR code, and he said, hit the QR code for a Bible and for a connection to other seasoned Christians, right? This is normal for an altar call because they want to put you in touch with someone who can shepherd you, so someone can pray for you through this process and you're not just like left abandoned. So pastors, remember that, like, you're the QR code in real life, right? That was what that was a substitute for. You are being given an opportunity to bring people into the church. And also I would be careful about when asking to pledge money or get into tithing, that your messaging should be delicate on that for brand new people to a brand new church.
Because I do think there are going to be people who say everything's going to hell, so I better go to church, and they might call friends, family, or they just might go to the phone book or Google. There are no phone books. That was a tell. Go to Google and put your town in and get 4 or 5 different things and say, go out there. Mary Catherine Ham, glad that Getting Hammered is back. May it be more and more frequent. Thank you so much for joining me. Follow her on X at MK Hammer.